As a teacher of deaf and hard of hearing students, Charlotte has witnessed firsthand the profound impact of language deprivation on young individuals. Today, Charlotte is on a mission to raise awareness about language deprivation and the profound impact that early exposure to language can have on a child's development, creating a more inclusive and accessible environment where all students have the opportunity to flourish. Her talk title is Hear Me Out.
A few of you are looking at me like you don't know what the hell I just said, so let me start again. Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Charlotte Patterson, and I want you to hear me out on an issue that you may have never heard of. There is a group of children in Central Oregon that are overlooked, misunderstood, and deprived. Think back to how you first learned your very first language. It happens like magic. When we're born, our brains are primed to be picking up the language from all around us. For a hearing baby, they're picking up language from every corner of their environment, whether that be overhearing conversations, television, music. For a hearing child, language just seems to happen. Oh. Thank you. But for a deaf or hard of hearing child, it may look a little different. They may not have access to all of the spoken sounds within their home. They might not be able to even access any spoken language at all. And in those cases, they need a visual language, such as American Sign Language. When children are born deaf or hard of hearing, they're at risk of developing what's known as language deprivation syndrome. Back one more. To help illustrate what language deprivation syndrome is, here's a picture of a little girl, and she is immersed within a language-rich environment in ASL. And so, when she sees the teddy bear in her brain, she thinks the sign bear. This other child is able to access spoken English, and so when they see the bear, they think the word bear. But the child on the bottom has not had full access to a language-rich environment and has language deprivation. So when they see that teddy bear, they just see a picture of a bear in their mind. There's something known as the critical window for language acquisition. From birth until the cusp of puberty, which is about age 9 to 12 for most people, our brain's neuroplasticity is ready and making all of those neuro connections and neural pathways, making connections to the world around it and all the language that it's immersed in. However, if a child does not have full access and doesn't have the ability to develop that fluent language within those first 9 to 12 years of their life, that window unfortunately closes. And the impacts of language deprivation are similar to brain damage, and it's irreversible. Sure, many of you are familiar with this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a framework very commonly used in education to help us understand human development. Maslow's hierarchy has tiers laying out all of our basic needs as human beings, starting with our physical needs, safety, social, esteem, and then finally, self-actualization. A good way of thinking about it is those needs at the very bottom are what we need for survival. All of those needs being met in between is what allows us to meet thrival. But there's something missing from Maslow's hierarchy: language. The very thing that we need in order to communicate our needs, build connections, have self-esteem, to reach self-actualization, and to become a thriving human being isn't at all mentioned on Maslow's hierarchy. What the hell, Maslow? I mean, when we're teachers, we learn that a child that's hungry can't learn. So what do? We keep snacks in our desks. We make sure that they're fed breakfast and lunch every day. We give them safe spaces to learn. We make sure that their social needs are met and they're able to build self-esteem. But without language, maybe those physical needs can be met, but a child cannot reach a higher level on Maslow's hierarchy. They are completely deprived and denied the ability to become a self-actualized human being because of that basic need not being met. The symptoms of language deprivation syndrome include a lack in all of these areas. As a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, I see my students struggle with these areas every day. I also see them struggle in their social and emotional well-being. Because of language deprivation and the impact it's had on my students, they feel lonely, they are isolated. Some of the worst cases that I have with some of my students is that they become severely depressed and have suicidal ideation. When students that I work with don't have a way to communicate with language, they'll find other ways. I've been kicked, pinched, punched, slapped, flipped off. My students will find any other way that they can to communicate what's going on within their bodies when they're frustrated or confused. They become angry. And can you blame them? They go to school and they might have an interpreter in their classroom that they can connect with, maybe the teacher of the deaf that comes and sees them. But then they go home and there's no more communication all weekend, every school break. I'd be pissed too. In 2016, I graduated from Western Oregon University with my degree in American Sign Language interpreting. I moved to Central Oregon to start my career and was told I'd be working in a third grade classroom with a profoundly deaf 9-year-old. What I didn't know was that this child was alingual. They did not talk. They knew some basic signs, but born into a family of hearing individuals that never learned sign language, they were years behind their peers. So I did what I was told in my training. Of course, I was at the front of the classroom interpreting all the lessons, trying to get the student to understand what I was saying, but it was a lot like your guys' faces at the beginning of my talk. Nothing was going through because it wasn't accessible to him. And I knew at 9 years old that critical window was surely closing, and it was going to be closing soon. So something had to be done. So we drew. These are some pictures from that student. The one in the corner here is a drawing he did when I cut my hair from long to very short, and he wasn't very happy about that. The second is a drawing he did of his own bedroom. We used this drawing so that I could teach him some vocabulary around a familiar setting for him. This bottom one is a drawing of Friday Night at Freddy's, his favorite video game. The one in the middle was to tell me that his auntie had recently become pregnant. And the last one was to let me know that his father had been arrested the night before. Without us having this way of allowing him to communicate, I would have never known that that's what he was going through that day. I remember, as usual, I walked into the classroom one day and I asked him, which is ASL for how are you? He looked at me as he did every day and said, now this is the sign for happy. but I could tell he wasn't happy. His face and his body language said everything but. So we took out our handy dandy whiteboard and we practiced. It was then that my student took the whiteboard from me, erased it, and began to draw. And what he drew was concerning. It was a picture of a person in a cage. Shocked, I looked at his picture and asked, "Who?" He signed, that part gets me every time, guys. And it still impacts me to this day because it takes me right back to being a very first year interpreter, working with a kid that wasn't telling me how he felt. And now he was. And I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if it meant that I needed to get on the phone with CPS because he's being put in a cage. I didn't know if it meant that he just felt trapped and sad, or I don't know, was it something he saw in a movie? I didn't know what it meant because he didn't have the language to tell me. All he had was his pictures. While this was the first deaf child with language deprivation that I worked with, it wouldn't be my last. I've lived and worked within Central Oregon for the last 8 years, and every year I have several students on my caseload that are severely impacted by the impacts of language deprivation. In fact, more than 90% of deaf children are born to hearing families. Around 72% of those families will never learn to sign. 70% of deaf children, due to their lack of fully being immersed within an accessible environment, will in some way be impacted by language deprivation. And the typical 18-year-old deaf student will exit high school with a reading level of about 4th to 6th grade. Now, I'm not here to make blanket statements about every deaf or hard of hearing child or adult. I know that there are countless success stories because they were given full access to language early on and given every opportunity in order to fully thrive and lead successful lives. But I'm not here to spotlight those people today. I'm trying to shine a light on the students that we do not talk about. In Central Oregon, we need more resources for families that are striving to support their deaf and hard of hearing children. We also need a community that's aware and able to step in and build that village for these families. Because guess what? Language deprivation is preventable. As long as children are given a language-rich environment that they're given full access to during that critical window, everything that I just mentioned won't happen. They will be given every chance to reach self-actualization because they won't have been denied that basic human need of language. I dream of a world where my students aren't linguistically neglected by their families, where they go to school and go home and get to tell their families what they learned that day, where they know what's going to happen over the weekend before the weekend happens, where they're building connections with friends and family and teachers, where they're actually excited to go home for winter or Thanksgiving break because they won't be isolated at the dinner table or feel lonely in a room full of their own family. I really just needed you guys today to hear me out about this because I need my students to be seen. And I want to be very clear about something. There's nothing impaired about my students. But if they're struggling to learn, communicate, or connect, maybe it's because you're signing impaired. So let's change that. We can all start our journey to becoming less signing impaired today. Go ahead and take out your phones and scan these resources that are both in English or in Spanish. These resources can be shared electronically or as printouts, as they are all hyper linked and also have QR codes. If you would like a printout tonight after all of the presentations, I will have some in the lobby. And to get you all started on your journey to becoming less signing impaired, I'd like to teach you all how to sign good night. So take your dominant hand and take your fingertips on your chin, other hand palm out. The back of this hand's gonna come down, and that's the sign for good. Now you just flip those two over and it becomes night. All right, let's try it all together. Ready? Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.